Welcome to the Common Man Football Show. My name is James Coburn, and today's episode we're going to be talking about Jadaveon Clowney versus Khalil Mack.
There can be only one.
And this was a question basically commented from Rosalie Paul. He said, Khalil Mack versus Clowney, please, in question marks. And yeah, let's do a Jadaveon Clowney versus Khalil Mack analytics battle. We're purely looking at what their analytics are, athleticism data, production data, all that kind of stuff. I figured this would be a good chance to kind of showcase defensive end / outside linebacker, 3-4 outside linebacker data, particularly pass rusher data, because the dominant sort of force when it comes to pass rusher data, pass rusher analytics is, of course, force players and all the stuff that Justice Mosqueda does. PFF does a ton of stuff about pressure production, and then of course you have the sort of prevailing, disruption is production, and there's a lot of stuff. And I'm not denying that there is value to a lot of stuff that Justice Mosqueda does. In fact, a lot of the stuff that I do in terms of athletic analytics is heavily influenced by many of the influences that Justice Mosqueda has. But there's multiple facets, multiple variables to pass rusher analytics than just athleticism data. And I figured, let's get into a little bit of that, kind of the things that people don't talk about much at all when it comes to athleticism and edge rushers and stuff like that. So the main things we're going to be looking at today is, one, market share production. Market share production at the defensive side of the football is where you take an individual defensive statistic and you divide it by the team total statistic. So if a pass rusher had 10 sacks on a team that had 40 sacks, then that pass rusher had 25% sack market share, and then you take that number and you compare it to every single pass rusher since the 1989 NFL draft class, and then you have a way of comparing previous pass rushers in terms of how they performed in this particular metric. I look at solo tackle market share, sack market share, and tackle for loss market share. All three of those main metrics form the bulk of most of the model in terms of its potential success. Then we're also going to look at athleticism data, specifically explosive lower body strength, which is the vertical and the broad jump measured against mass density, which is very similar, if not pretty much the same thing as what Justice Mosqueda does when it comes to his explosion data stuff. The speed score, which takes into account the 40-yard dash measured against mass density, and then, of course, the flexibility score, which is a short shell / three cone measured against mass density. And then the final thing we'll talk about when it comes to athleticism is the three cone specifically, because there is actually a lot of data pointing towards hitting a certain mark in the three cone and becoming a multiple All-Pro or a multiple Pro Bowl type of pass rusher, which ultimately might be the thing that seals the deal in this particular analytics battle. So with all those terms out of the way, let's get to Jadaveon Clowney in terms of how he looked in terms of his college production and, of course, how he looked in terms of his athleticism data. So starting with Jadaveon Clowney in terms of his production in college, he had an 85.78 solo tackle market share score, a 79.36 sack market share score, and a 96.10 tackle for loss market share score. As you can see here, he pretty much hit every single metric you're looking for when it comes to a Pro Bowl pass rusher. The only place where he kind of fell short a bit was his sack market share. He didn't hit the 84.67, which is the All-Pro threshold since the 1989 NFL draft class when it comes to that particular metric. But in general, he didn't really have any major red flags in terms of his market share production. There wasn't one metric that was not hitting All-Pro or Pro Bowl thresholds, is all I'm trying to say. Basically, a red flag is usually a guy who doesn't hit one of these thresholds. He hit multiple thresholds in terms of success. It's just that he didn't hit the All-Pro sack threshold. That's the only sort of major sort of issue in terms of his overall profile if you're just going to talk about issues. But his athleticism data was actually pretty dang good as well. He had a 91.58 explosive lower body strength score, a 98.96 speed score, which is one of the best on paper, and of course a 79.01 flexibility score. If you look at his numbers compared to other potential players in terms of All-Pro threshold, Pro Bowl threshold, he pretty much hits every single metric in terms of All-Pro and Pro Bowl players in terms of athleticism for his size. But the only major misstep he has is that his three cone of 7.27 is only Pro Bowl threshold in terms of that particular metric. 100% of multiple Pro Bowl defensive ends since the 1999 NFL draft class had at least a 7.37 or less three-cone, and 100% of all-pro edge rushers since the 1999 NFL draft class had at least a 7.11 three-cone or less. And in Clowney's case, he did not hit the 7.11 three-cone spot, and thus it kind of drops his overall projection to just a guy with Pro Bowl potential versus All-Pro potential. But other than that, when you look at Clowney's overall profile, he looks really, really dang good. I mean, he had very good production overall. He had very good athleticism overall. And when it actually comes to his NFL production, although 2014 was ended shortly because of injury, in 2015 he ended up with a 90.1 overall production score. Basically, TPER is a number that takes into account solo tackle market share, sack market share, and pass deflection market share. It basically combines to look at what their total impact was. And in 2015, Jadaveon Clowney was a top 10 performer in terms of edge rushers in data. And in 2016, he also was a top 10 performer in terms of edge rusher overall impact. So when he actually was healthy, he was a very productive pass rusher slash edge rusher. And so far, I mean, his career looks good. He doesn't exactly look like a multiple All-Pro player. He didn't look like that coming out of college based on his production, also based on his three-cone. But he does have a very good case to be made that he had a lot of very strong positives to his overall profile coming out of college. Then we get to Khalil Mack. When it comes to his production, he had a 99.43 solo tackle market share score, a 62.84 sack market share score, and a 97.82 tackle for loss market share score. As you can clearly see here, he was someone who had another sort of issue to Clowney in that his sack market share didn't quite, hit All-Pro level. Again, All-Pro level threshold is 84.67 out of 100. And again, this is for guys who go to the All-Pro 4 times in a row, 5 times in a row. 4 times in a row or more is essentially what the All-Pro threshold is. We're talking about guys like Derek Thomas. We're talking about guys like Jared Allen. We're talking about guys like that. Is the players we're talking about, Von Miller, people like that. So Khalil Mack didn't necessarily hit that mark, but what is important to say is that some of that may have to do with the fact that at Buffalo he was playing a position that was not exactly a full-time pass rusher. He was more so a Sam linebacker-ish kind of position, which may have influenced his thing because, again, he had extremely high solo tackle market share. In fact, if he was a linebacker, he would have hit the Pro Bowl threshold in terms of linebackers, in terms of his solo tackle market share at Buffalo. So he was a very high-end guy in terms of solo tackle market share, very high-end in terms of tackle for loss market share, which are very good. And then when it comes to his athleticism, this is probably one of the main things that Khalil Mack wins out, is that he was a tremendous athlete in every single facet of his game. He had a 95.56 explosive lower body strength score, a 95.85 speed score, and a 94.10 flexibility score. In many ways, he is an elite level athlete in the NFL. And when you actually get to his three-cone, which is probably one of the bigger differences between Jadaveon Clowney and Khalil Mack, Khalil Mack had a 7.08 three-cone, which is well within the All-Pro threshold of 7.11 or less, and of course blows the Pro Bowl threshold of 7.37 or less out of the water. So from an athletic standpoint, Khalil Mack had All-Pro potential based on his athleticism traits, while Jadaveon Clowney did not have All-Pro potential based on his athleticism traits. And that is going to be a big thing when we get to the final conclusion of this. But then you get to the NFL production, which in Khalil Mack's case, his entire career in the NFL, he has been a top 5 pass rusher. In 2014, he had a 96.41 total impact score. In 2015, he had a 94.01 total impact score, which is top 5. And then in 2016, he was basically the most impactful pass rusher in the NFL with a 98.24 overall total impact score in terms of his NFL production. So it's pretty clear that when you look at Khalil Mack coming out of college, he had similar issues to Jadaveon Clowney just in terms of sack market share, not hitting All-Pro threshold, but he was the only one who had All-Pro athleticism, and so far in his career, he's been killing it at a heck of a lot more of a rate than Jadaveon Clowney has. Jadaveon Clowney's been good, but he just hasn't been elite, and that's really the main difference between these two types of players. So in conclusion, who won this battle in terms of analytics battle? I think it's clear on paper that if it was the 2014 NFL draft class all over again, you would look at the fact that when it comes to production, Jadaveon Clowney and Khalil Mack are basically even in terms of the major concerns. Khalil Mack was much higher in terms of solo tackle market share and much higher in terms of tackle for loss market share coming out of Buffalo than Jadaveon Clowney. Although you could make the case that Jadaveon Clowney was playing in, South Carolina, the SEC, so maybe that had to do something to it. But when you actually look at the athleticism differences, it becomes readily apparent that Khalil Mack was the one that had elite level athleticism in every single facet, from his explosiveness to his speed to his flexibility. Every single athleticism trait was elite. He hit the All-Pro 3-cone threshold, which I already went over in terms of his athleticism traits, while Clowney only hit the Pro Bowl threshold. So by just looking at all that data, you would basically go that in terms of Clowney and in terms of Khalil Mack, just in a general sense, their production kind of cancels out each other in terms of their production in college to a certain extent. But when you look at the athleticism, that is the big difference. That is the big sort of determining factor to kind of give Khalil Mack the win here, is his athleticism traits, because he had all-pro athleticism traits while Jadaveon Clowney had Pro Bowl athleticism traits. And there's nothing wrong with having Pro Bowl athleticism traits. But what you can see over the last 3 seasons, even if you exclude the fact that Jadaveon Clowney, let's just throw 2014 out because Clowney was injured for most of 2014, didn't really get to start much at all in that year. Even if you throw that out and you just look at 2015 and 2016, Khalil Mack has been a top 5 pass rusher, if not the best overall edge defender type in terms of impact in the NFL, while Clowney has only been hanging out in the top 10s in terms of his total impact score. And this was also in a season where Clowney lost J.J. Watt, because I know some of you are going to go, well, J.J. Watt is there, so it's kind of hard to be productive. But Jadaveon Clowney had a season where J.J. Watt was mostly out of commission, and Jadaveon Clowney still wasn't a top 5 overall pass rusher. He was still very good. He was still a top 10 overall edge defender, but he wasn't a top 5 overall edge defender. So ultimately, that is just the difference. When you look at the data, when you look at the analytics, it was clear that Khalil Mack had the edge. He had the edge in terms of athleticism. He had the edge in terms of his 3-cone. And those are 2 things in particular that if you have a case like this, if you have a situation where you have 2 edge rushers who their production pretty much cancels out in terms of what their overall potential can be, you still have to go with the guy who has a better sort of production sort of profile. And of course that is Khalil Mack. So I think in the future this is also a good sort of thing to look at, is that again, athleticism matters. It definitely does. But there are lots of other players who have athleticism that is almost identical to Khalil Mack, who weren't as productive as Khalil Mack and didn't really do much of anything. And I'm actually going to get into a couple videos about that yes, athleticism data, I mean, if you were just going by athleticism data, you would have made the right decision with going with Khalil Mack. But production is an important thing to track. It is important. It is very important to look at it, to think about it, to have it in your mind when you're projecting edge rushers, because it tells you a lot about their reliability. It tells you a lot about the things that they're really good at. In particular, Khalil Mack, even in his NFL career, wasn't the best sack guy ever. He had to develop into that, which so far he has. But it does inform you a little bit about what the strengths and weaknesses of a prospect may be coming out. Like Khalil Mack didn't have all-pro sack market share at Buffalo, but that didn't dismiss the fact that a lot of that was because he had to develop into a pass rush. He had to, develop his pass rush ability in the NFL, which he has, but it just kind of shows you some of the strengths and weaknesses about them when they get to the NFL. So ultimately, that's what it's at. Khalil Mack wins this analytics battle. And again, my name is James Coburn. You can find my work at draftcoburn.wordpress.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at Geometrics. And if you like this content and you want more content like this, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Share this video as well with anybody that you know, and I will talk to you guys in the next video. Peace.